I'm Duane Ehleringer. I'm a Flying Dutchman sailor who lives approximately 30 miles southeast of Portland, Oregon. Ken Frankel, a fellow Flying Dutchman sailor living south of Seattle, Washington, recently purchased a new Flying Dutchman and asked if I would help restore his older boat. Doug Dommermuth, another friend and fellow FD sailor, asked if I would take the time and record or document the process. From my perspective, it was easier to restore the hull than to create this video. The first thing I did was to go through the cockpit and review the different control lines and see which systems I could keep and which ones needed to be modified, trying to keep it as simple as possible. From there, I went to the foredeck to see how structurally sound it was. Parts of the foredeck, side deck, and aft deck did not look too good. I was hoping that with some varnish remover and some good sanding, I could resolve these cosmetic issues. I then continued to the opening to the spinnaker tube. It appeared to be designed for a smaller spinnaker than the ones we use today. After getting a general idea of the scope of work needed on the deck side, I then flipped the boat over to review the hull. I knew that was my starting point. I first reviewed the hull for structural damage. After seeing none, I did note that the hull needed a lot of work. Using simply some window cleaner, I started cleaning the hull surface, prepping it for sanding. Next, I removed the centerboard gasket and set it aside. With the centerboard gasket set aside, I started sanding the entire hull. While editing this video, I see myself without a mask. The vacuum system, including the sander, is pretty good. The room is well ventilated to the outside, but I probably should have and would recommend wearing a dust mask. I do wear a mask later in videos when dust and wood chips are flying everywhere. Spoiler alert, I later on decide to remove the entire deck, but that's in the next video. Completing the first sanding, I then circled with a light pencil mark any blemish I noted on the hull. I would guess it took a good 30 minutes to go over the entire hull, marking all these blemishes. After identifying the blemishes, I came back and lightly sanded these areas by hand. I wanted a good bonding surface on these areas for the epoxy micro balloon filler I intended to use. Before applying this epoxy-based filler, I additionally cleaned the surface by lightly wiping the entire surface using some damp rags. After the hull was completely dried, I followed this up with wiping these still circled areas with a light pencil mark with acetone. Acetone was my final cleaning prior to mixing the filler and applying. I would recommend both a face mask and gloves when using acetone over a large period of time. The epoxy-based microballoon filler I use is a product produced by Pettit. It is called Easy Fair. It is a two-part epoxy filler. It is very durable and yet very light. It also is very easy sanding, but at the same time can be sanded down to a high polish. One important point I would bring up is when mixing a two-part epoxy product like this filler is to do a process called double cup mixing. This is when you mix the two parts together, and then after they have been thoroughly mixed, transfer the mixed product to another clean cup, wipe the stirring stick clean, then briefly mix one more time. This should take no more than a minute or two, but it ensures that the applied product is only mixed product. Nothing can be worse than placing unmixed product down. It will never cure and just become a mess to clean up later. With the proper temperatures, the curing time could be as little as 1 hour. I would recommend allowing for a longer curing time. The instructions state approximately 40 minutes, but I want a dried surface so my sanding pad does not gum up when sanding. One other point I would make at this time is mixing only enough product that can be applied within a 10-minute period of time. When mixing large quantities of epoxy at one time, the thermal reaction occurs much quicker. Too much product at one time can actually cause heat to build up so quickly it can cause a fire. When completed with any mixture of epoxy, always set the remaining cup or container aside on the floor until the product has gone through its natural reaction, cured and cooled down. You do not want to place the cup in a trash container only to later to cause a fire. Observing the remaining product in the cup is a good measurement of when your applied product has cured enough to begin sanding. The hand tools I use to apply the microballoon epoxy filler are a flexible spatula I bought from McMaster Carr and a rubber squeegee I purchased from Fiberglass Supply out of the state of Washington. After applying the microballoon epoxy product on the port side, I let it cure and started the same sanding process on the starboard side. Again, after completing the first sanding on the starboard side, I trace the blemishes I find with a light pencil mark. In a few seconds you'll see up close how they appear. After tracing all these blemishes, I sand these areas lightly by hand and then using acetone clean these areas so I get a clean bonding surface for the epoxy filler. Here you can see up close the individual blemishes prior to sanding. Again, I'm sanding the individual blemishes prior to applying the filler. And again, prior to applying the microballoon filler, I clean the areas with acetone. I then mix up a small batch of microballoon filler. Remember to double cup mix the product. I then applied to the starboard side of the hull. After confirming the filler has cured well enough to sand by examining both the hull and remaining product in the disposable cups, I sand the entire hull. It could be you have a question on what the make of sander I use while sanding down the hull and sanding down the epoxy filler. I found this Mirka with 6-inch sanding disc the perfect tool for this operation. I find this Mirka sander performs most times as good as a long board block using 1/10 of the time and effort to perform the same task. It's important to constantly be rotating and moving the disc sander to ensure a truly smooth surface. It's a little pricey, but it saved me many hours of time and effort. After completion of sanding the filler, I re-examined the entire hull and find additional blemishes I want to address. I then started the entire process over again. This time I find only a few areas which need addressing. I seem not to have the video or pictures of the preparation for priming and painting. Here is the results before final buff out. I finished this video with a quick preview of the complete deck and cockpit and the spinnaker tube opening. Hopefully another video to follow shortly showing my approach on removing and replacing the deck. Hopefully this video promotes conversation within the group with potentially other techniques or topics being discussed or produced. I hope this video helps, and I wish everyone the best. Thanks for watching.